Okay, we've come to the final test and a little bit of a revision, but first let's go through a few key points. It's worth 40% of this component or 20% of the overall mark you're going to get for fashion distribution and logistics. We've got two sessions running for tests, one at 8:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. and the second one from 9:30 to 10:30 a.m. So it's going to be in the normal lecture rooms where we normally have the lectures on the Thursday. Um, so groups T, R, and M are up first at 8:30, and A, U, and I are lucky enough to sleep in for an extra hour. It's going to run for 60 minutes. It's closed book. You will need a calculator. Well, you may. It's preferable to have a calculator. You can do it in your head if you want, required, but you can't use your mobile phones as calculators, so you'll have to bring one in that can do what you need it to do. Format is in two components. There's a multiple choice format similar to the first test and a true and false component. There's no short answer section on this final test, unlike the first test. Um, excuse me. Incoterms template is provided. We'll talk about that a bit later. Formula sheet is provided for your economic order quantities, etc. And they're sparse based on the test, so you can use that to do any workings out you wish to work out. Important to note, students have to sit in their designated class times. If we've got students from Group T, R and M who are sitting in A, U and I, we're not going to accept that test, simply being there's just not enough room. So we've just got enough room for each group. Topics to be covered, we'll go through them now. Transport, Incoterms, inventory, warehouse and procurement are the main sort of topics. But let's go back and where are we? Oops, I should have made this clear. We're basically testing you on everything after the first test. So after the L'Oreal Fashion Week is when we start. Logistics service providers, air and sea. So what you may recall from this is we started to look at the different types of classification company or different types of companies that we can classify according to our own accounts. So make sure you're familiar with those because we might ask you what they are. Make sure you know the difference between third and fourth party logistics providers, and you may recall that our fourth party logistics providers um, not only will transport goods, but they'll go even further and do things like handle all bank facilities and reconciliations. They'll pay wages for us. So they do that so we can focus on our core competencies. Um, we might ask you about Incoterms, what they are. So they're international contract terms. Make sure you're up with them. There's four basic terms. The X works where all the risk is taken by the importer, and D terms at the other end where all the risk is taken by the exporter. So kind of be familiar with them. You don't need to know every single Incoterm, but what they do and the major difference between, say, an X works, EXW, and any of the Ds or DDP at the other extreme. Um, Image, we looked through that, so you should familiarise yourself with those. They're quite fine, I think. Again, make sure you're comfortable with all of that. Sea cargo containers, we've spoken about them in two different lectures. They're standardised. There's two types, 20 foot, 40 foot container. You won't need to memorize dimensions or anything like that, other than the fact that because they're standardized, it makes it very efficient to move them around the world. Two types of costings. We've got FCL and LCL costings. Make sure you know the difference, why they're different and why we could get charged accordingly. Then then we had an Easter break and we came back and started our air freight calculations, and we did that using this PowerPoint slide where I introduced you into this concept of capacity utilization. Um, Basically, you run a plane or a ship half empty, you're going to pay more per unit. So we looked at different configurations you can have on the aircraft, whether it's a container, sewing machine, etc. We looked at the busiest airport in the world and the fact that geography has a significant impact on your logistics. So we were saying you could centralize all your transport into one area ensures 100% capacity utilization of these aircraft coming into the United States, and then passengers would disembark and get on smaller aircraft which equally would be 100% full, running off to the east coast and west coast of the US or any other parts of the world. We then replicated that on a global scale, and we've seen that in the Middle East, Etihad, Qatar, and Emirates did pretty much the same thing. And we looked at Australia as well, and the problems, the unique problems with Qantas, and how one of the reasons why they're not a cost-effective airline is because of the geography. Fast, yeah. We looked at manufacturers and the issues about getting big planes and having to fill them. Recall the efficiencies of a Jetstar fleet. All running Airbuses means you got the same maintenance schedule, whereas Qantas running different aircraft has a much higher operating cost. Future manufacturers. Okay, this is also important. The tax rate, the air cargo tariff. So make sure you're familiar with this sheet and the fact that it has all of the cargo prices on it, and cargo in an aircraft moves on a ULD, unit load device, various sizes, shapes, depending on the aircraft, depending on where the aircraft is going. And when we go to the airport and we want to put our goods on an aircraft, we have to follow 6 steps, determine the volumetric weight. So we get the weight of the product divided by 6,000, always 6,000. So if we ask you to do it on the test, you're going to have to do it by 6,000. So you're going to need to know these steps. Step 2, determine the actual weight. Put it on a set of scales. Comes in at 35 kilos. Airlines will always charge you the greater of the two weights. Oops, sorry about that. Not the smaller one. So we're running a box that weighs 46.67 kg. Step 4, select the appropriate rate class. 45 kg is going to fit in 46 kg. Sorry, it's going to fit in the 45 class rate. Then we have to go find out how much that cost is for a 45 class rate. So that's step 5, and minimum N, which is N 0 to 44, 45 onwards, etc. $9.05 per kg. Remember, that's per kilogram. And step 6, calculate the air freight cost. $9.05 plus the weight of the box. You can round up, no big deal. If you leave it to 2 decimal places, or round up, $425.35 is the cost just to transport that box. Melbourne, Nuremberg. So make sure you're familiar with the steps and don't catch that flight, because I've heard it's not very reliable. Okay, then briefly we went into those, don't worry about them. So question may look something like this on the test. We'll give you a template somewhat similar to this. Oh, in fact, where is it? It's there. That's the one you're more familiar with, you would have done. So we'll give you something like that. We may or may not give you that part of it, so you need to make sure you know all of those steps, the ones we've just done now. And make sure you calculate down to where it asks you to calculate. So if we ask you to do an FCA, obviously you don't go down to DDP, and vice versa. Okay. Where are we? There we are. And then we ran through those, so make sure you practice those a bit. Might ask you to turn it into a foreign currency as well. Okay, next thing we looked at, air freight inventory management. Or the fundamentals. Okay, a few things now. So we're in the warehouse now. We were looking at why we need inventory. Make sure you're familiar with that, and this concept of how much inventory and what factors influence how much we want. So inventory can be classified as raw materials, work in process, finished goods, maintenance. We might ask you about each of those or one of them. The functions of inventory. Just because it's stock and it's in our warehouse doesn't mean it's all the same. Might have different roles to play in our business. disadvantages. Costs, there's four costs involved. We simply think of inventory perhaps superficially as being the cost to store the goods or carrying them, but there's the cost of the item, order cost, and the cost of not selling goods, or cost of lost sales. VMI, vendor managed inventory, this is where the seller controls the inventory of the buyer. So it'll be like someone coming to your place and deciding what to put in your refrigerator and actually putting it in your refrigerator. So they don't do the shopping at all. It's up to you, the seller, or Coles, coming to your house and filling your fridge up. Why? Have a look yourself to make sure you're familiar with those. Financial implications of inventory. Make sure you've got an idea of what this concept of inventory turns ratio is. Number of times inventory is replaced in a given year. If you've got a turn ratio of 1 in 12 months, it means you're going to get stock replaced once in that 12 months. If you've got a stock turn of 12, it means possibly you're going to have it replaced once a month. We looked at a few formulas there to get our inventory turns. Familiarize yourself with all of this stuff. Then we looked at Pareto and the ABC analysis. So the basic rule is the 80-20 rule. 80% of sales come from 20% of stock. Could work that way, or vice versa. The main point is our A products is where we get most of our profit from, but B and C products are also important because this is like our what do we say? Accessories. And I think we looked at sports girl by memory. Okay, steps to determine it, and we went through a little table in your tutes on how to do that and define what is the A stock, B stock, and C stock. Important point to know is that why we categorize it as such. And finally, keep large amounts of C items on hand. Value of items usually not worth the extra control to keep inventory accurate. So because it constitutes a small amount of our sales in terms of dollars, we're not going to spend a lot of time counting all the accessories and all the bracelets to make sure it's all there. It's just a waste of, it's not an efficient allocation of resources. But obviously you don't tell staff that, because otherwise they'll pinch the bracelets. And yeah, thank you too. Now, where to next? What else we got? Then we had a look at order quantities, and how much is the question we have to ask. How much stock should we have on hand at any given time? And in particular, we looked at this concept with our charts. Order cost curve, carrying cost curve. I think we've done it ad nauseum. Make sure you're familiar with them, what they do, why they do what they do. And this point, the EOQ, or economic order quantity, the optimal amount of garments to have in our warehouse, optimum amount of garments to order in a given phone call, if you like. Then we looked at this formula. As I said, we'll give you this formula, but make sure you know how to use it, apply it. And then we went through various examples. I won't go through them all on this one. Should we place per year? Yep. Important point to note, oh yeah, that didn't quite work, did it? Important point to note is this third curve, total cost curve. Just remember, once again, 500, or it's just off 500, is, the optimal amount to order. If we order 501, our costs start to increase. If we order 499, our costs start to increase. So this is the lowest amount of cost we can have for the number of garments we need in a given order. A couple of formulas we looked at there, which will give you carrying cost. I think that one pretty much covers it in there. Now, then last week we basically looked at procurement, sourcing, and transportation. Remember, procurement is a strategic decision. It's before saying we need fabric, we ask ourselves why we need fabric, and then that's going to influence where we go looking for it. So if we're a top-end design house, if we're Xenia, for instance, that retail suits for between $2,000 and up to $15,000 for one suit, then we define that we're a high-end designer, exclusive designer, and that is part of our procurement decision making. And that says, well, we don't go to a low labour cost country to get the material for it. We go to Japan, Germany, Italy, and vice versa. If you Kmart, for instance, or Target. Sourcing then is actually going out. That's a second tier. It relates to identifying and working with appropriate suppliers. So that's looking for which suppliers match our business. And then finally you go out and buy the products. It's the functional level, the third level. And this is going to involve, how do you buy it? How do you pay for it? Do we actually send someone over there to communicate with the staff? Get to know each other, create interpersonal relationships for the long term. And the reason we do it is because we have to. It's a competitive world. That's where we're going to get cost savings. So I won't go through the whole lot, but remember your strategies. It's a global context. The trend is that you as customers want better and better products, less patience. Some of the problems you may have, some of the qualifiers, or these are the terms and conditions. If you don't want to use the word qualifiers, I'll only pay you if you deliver on time, if you provide a certificate of quality, if it meets my specifications, etc. And this little scenario here, which was basically about the notion that we can increase our profits by selling more. However, one of the cost-effective ways we can do it is actually reduce our procurement or change our procurement strategy to reduce costs and just sell the same amount of garments. So you don't necessarily have to push more garments to make a profit or change the price of those garments. Reasons to have supply chains. Don't forget this one as well. The components change, so now we're having to spend more time reducing the cost of resource and materials. And to do that, there's a greater emphasis on procurement strategies. That just shows it visually. In terms of transport, just remember this notion here of the shorter the distance travelled, the higher cost per unit or per kilometre travelled, and then that sort of levels off the further you go. In short, it's justification for why you should or why it's reasonable to get products from a long way away. And it's the same in this case, but in reverse. Then we briefly looked at all of these to see the relative costs and why the costs are different based on fixed and variable costs, whether they're high or not, who pays to build the road or the railway line, what you need to put a boat on the water, and we looked at pipeline and then the internet as well as an example. Intermodal transport, effective planning infrastructure. One of the problems is it's a derived demand. Derived demand simply means that demand for transport is not innate. It's people want to go to Thailand for a holiday, therefore there's demand for transport. Nobody gets on a plane just to go for a joy flight for 24 hours. Well, some people might, but most don't. Given that that's the case, that it's derived, the question that transport planners must ask is, why are you travelling from your home to Brunswick every day? And then say, what's the most appropriate form of transport to get you there? Difficult to get right. Factory gate pricing, also known as sex works pricing, you should be familiar with, and it's basically the same. So have a look at those as well, excuse me, as the final video, which was also up and I'll deliver tomorrow as well. Okay, so just in finishing, let's go back to this one. 1 hour, so it's a bit tight in terms of distance, but not doable. Bring a pen, don't bring your phone, bring a calculator, and we'll see you on Thursday morning. If you're late, well, you can only get to do whatever time you've got left in the test. Good luck, and I'll see you then.